All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're doing a completely impartial breakdown of a highly charged news broadcast from April 2026. You know, the one covering the third assassination attempt on Donald Trump. We're going to look directly at the primary source, this specific primetime broadcast, and really analyze how they reported, framed, and basically made sense of this chaotic night in real time. It's like watching a giant puzzle being put together on live TV, blending breaking news, political analysis, and some pretty intense cultural commentary. To help us make sense of this really dense broadcast, we've organized the source material into 6 key areas. We're looking at the attack timeline, profiling the suspect, the intense debate over political rhetoric, assessing the security failures, the Jimmy Kimmel controversy, and finally, a surprising pivot to a royal diplomatic visit. Okay, let's start with Section 1, the attack timeline and the chaos at the White House Correspondents Dinner. So, we're going to begin by unpacking the broadcast's minute-by-minute breakdown of the event. And they go to great lengths to establish just how incredibly fast this night went from tuxedos and gowns to absolute utter panic. At 8:15 p.m., the president walks into the ballroom. There's a crowd of about 2,000 people, journalists, celebrities, you name it. But then, just 15 minutes later, at 8:30 p.m., right in the middle of a mentalist's act, sudden gunfire erupts. The timeline they show gives us this staggering 5-minute window of sheer chaos before the shooter is finally taken into custody at 8:35. And get this, by 9:17 p.m., the president was already posting an update on social media from a secure holding area, actually suggesting the event should just keep going. To really capture the sudden terror of those 5 minutes, the broadcast highlighted this visceral, first-hand account from veteran journalist Wolf Blitzer. He recounted stepping out of the room to use the restroom, only to find himself basically face-to-face with the chaos. It absolutely paints a picture of how unpredictable this was. I mean, one minute you're at a glamorous black tie gala, and the very next you're an eyewitness describing a gunman firing randomly just feet away from you. Just wild. And the tension is dialed up even further with this intense perspective from another eyewitness. This person found themselves literally inches away from the president as the Secret Service agent swarmed the stage. The broadcast uses these really specific, granular accounts to anchor us, the viewers, right in the terrifying reality of that room. We're talking flipped chairs, shattered glass, and guests just hitting the floor as agents shouted for everyone to get down. Moving on to Section 2, profiling the suspect, and taking a look at Cole Allen's background. What's really fascinating here is how the host details the suspect. They don't paint him as some uneducated fringe outcast, but rather, they highlight his really prestigious background. They describe this 31-year-old Caltech graduate with, as they put it, an engineering brain. He was a former teacher of the month and a video game designer, a totally seemingly normal professional life. But then, the broadcast sharply pivots. They frame him as a calculated left-wing militant, bringing up his involvement in certain activist groups and, crucially, statements his own sister made to the police about his radical views. So, the really crucial point the broadcast makes here is the deliberate premeditation. They flat-out reject the idea that this was just some spur-of-the-moment crime of opportunity. By mapping out his cross-country travel, leaving LA on the 21st, hitting Chicago on the 23rd, and finally checking into the Washington Hilton days in advance, the source portrays a sober-minded, calculating individual, someone who tracked the president's schedule and just waited for the exact right moment to strike. It's really a textbook example of how media builds a narrative of intent. That brings us to Section 3, debating political rhetoric, and the connection between media and motives. Now, this part is absolutely central to the source material's argument. The broadcast explicitly connects the suspect's alleged motives to broader, highly partisan political rhetoric. They present a side-by-side comparison, arguing that the shooter's manifesto, using words like fascist, is basically indistinguishable from the language mainstream media and political opponents use on a daily basis. The host is directly arguing that throwing around terms like dictator or Hitler essentially gives a green light to violence. And to put some numbers to this claim, the broadcast brings up this statistic, 27%. They claim that 27% of Democrats feel violence against Republicans is justified. The source is using this specific data point to suggest there's this growing cultural acceptance of violence within certain political factions. Now, whether you agree with that framing or not, this is a prime example of how broadcasts attempt to tie the actions of one lone individual to a much larger societal issue. Okay, Section 4. Assessing the security failures and how the perimeter was breached. We then pivot to the logistics. For a room packed with the president, cabinet members, and high-ranking officials, you really have to ask, how did someone get this close?
Well, the broadcast maps out a startlingly simple path of vulnerability. Because the suspect checked in as a normal hotel guest, his luggage wasn't heavily screened. He reportedly assembled his shotgun in a totally unmonitored area where they store bar cards. From there, he just ran down 10 flights of stairs, completely bypassing the main security perimeters until he hit the final magnetometers right outside the ballroom.
To really drive this home, they bring in former FBI agent Stuart Kaplan to critique the venue, and he does not mince words. He bluntly states that law enforcement got very lucky. Why? Because the shooter was positioned a floor above the ballroom. Kaplan points out that had the suspect been carrying explosives instead of a shotgun, the entire floor could have collapsed right onto the event. He basically argues that if the Secret Service can't control the venue from the general public, it is simply not suitable for a president. Which brings us to the concept of a choke point, basically a point of congestion or strict control. Analysts argue the hotel's layout totally failed to secure these critical areas, which is what allowed the threat to reach that floor right above the ballroom. The host notes this failure was so severe that extreme measures are now being debated at the White House. We're talking discussions about moving all future events to highly controlled, drone-proof venues, and even talks about the president having to wear a bulletproof vest in public from now on. Next up, Section 5. The Kimmel controversy and the late-night backlash. So right after breaking down the crime scene, the broadcast does this unexpected, hard pivot into a pop culture controversy involving late-night host Jimmy Kimmel. The network plays a clip of Kimmel making a joke about First Lady Melania Trump, saying she had a glow like an expectant widow. The broadcast plays a massive emphasis on the timing here, pointing out that this aired just 48 hours before the assassination attempt. Tying it back to their earlier point on rhetoric, they basically use this clip as Exhibit A of what they consider dangerous, normalized media hostility. And right after the joke plays, the broadcast flashes the First Lady's official response. And wow, she does not hold back. She calls the monologue corrosive and demands that the new CEO of Disney take immediate action against Kimmel. The broadcast even brings on a guest who used to work at the network to argue that corporate media executives need to step in and moderate this kind of dark humor, linking it directly to the heated climate that led to the shooting. Finally, Section 6, the royal visit, and a rather sudden diplomatic pivot. The broadcast wraps up with, honestly, a pretty jarring shift in tone. We go from domestic political tensions straight to international diplomacy, presenting the itinerary for King Charles and Queen Camilla's 4-day visit to the U.S. for the 250th anniversary. We're talking a South Lawn Garden tour, a state ceremony, a visit to the 9/11 memorial, and the king becoming the first monarch to address Congress since 1991. The broadcast frames all this pageantry as a symbol of unity, specifically meant to help mend relations that were recently strained with the British Prime Minister. Talk about whiplash, right? Going from an assassination attempt to a royal garden tour in the exact same broadcast hour. Which really leaves us with a critical thought to close out this explainer. How does the media's blending of terror, political commentary, pop culture grievances, and international pageantry fundamentally alter how we process history as it's happening? I mean, a single hour of television took us from the floor of a panicked ballroom into the mind of a suspect, through a debate on free speech, and right to the steps of a royal visit. It is a completely fascinating look at modern media consumption. Definitely something to chew on the next time you watch the news unfold. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking those big questions.